In this video, I'm going to talk about one of the strangest personalities in the MMA world, and also quite literally probably the weirdest UFC career of all time. So I'm going to talk about Mike the Truth Jackson. Mike the Truth Jackson. Many people know him for his fight against CM Punk, but this guy's been around for a very long time before then. So Mike Jackson was born on March 22nd, 1985, to a white father and a mixed-race mother. He grew up in the Woodlands in Texas, where he participated in badminton. He attended and remains an avid fan of the Vidor High School Rebels. Now, how did Mike Jackson's journey get to MMA? He met current UFC matchmaker Mick Maynard, where he was still president of Houston-based promotion Legacy FC, in 2008 while working a part-time job delivering newspapers. So Mike Jackson was, he was living the average 1950s kid sitcom lifestyle, as he was working as a part-time job. He was working a part-time job delivering newspapers for Maynard's print publication, the Maroon Weekly. This friendship would eventually lead to Mike Jackson working as a photographer for Maynard at Legacy FC and producing online content around the events. Now, when did he have his first fight? A year after this, Jackson decided to put on the gloves and made his amateur debut under the Lone Star Beatdown banner in September 2009. He would then proceed to lose the bout by unanimous decision. Now, what happened between there? A talent came out from the Dana Whites looking for a fight called Mickey Gall, who won his fight very dominantly against Ron Templeton by submission in the first round, and then proceeded to call for CM Punk. Now, there was no way the UFC were going to just give him straight to CM Punk. They wanted to see, is this guy worth risking losing CM Punk to? So they wanted to see if this guy was as good as they thought he was. So they were on the look for an opponent. And Mike Jackson, who was the photographer at the time and a journalist, he decided to put his hand up for the matchup. And the UFC, I guess with his relationship with Mick Maynard, they straight signed Mike Jackson for his first professional fight in the UFC, which he then proceeded to lose in 45 seconds, getting knocked down and choked out in a 45-second window. And then he faded away for 2 years, not really hearing much. I believe he had a kickboxing match in between against Jeremy Holloway, which he would lose by decision. And then CM Punk would lose to Mickey Gall in 2016. And then after CM Punk lost that, he himself sat out for 2 years. And CM Punk would another go of things, and the UFC could not think of anyone else who would be a fair fight for CM Punk. And remembering that CM Punk lasted longer against Mickey Gall than Mike Jackson, the UFC, light bulbs went off in the UFC matchmakers' heads. They said, why don't we give Mike Jackson another shot? CM Punk lasted longer than him, so maybe Mickey Gall's just some phenom. So they do this fight, CM Punk versus Mike Jackson, which was on the main card over Curtis Blades versus Alistair Overeem, was on the main card over Merced Bektik versus Ricardo Lamas, was higher up on the card than Charles Oliveira versus Clay Guida. Think about that. Charles Oliveira, one of the biggest stars in the UFC now, was on the early prelims, and CM Punk and Mike Jackson were opening up the main card of a pay-per-view. Like, they both had name value too. Clay Guida is a legend of the sport. He's had a long career. At the time, he was on a decent run. He was on a 2-fight winning streak. I believe Charles Oliveira was just coming off his loss to Paul Felder. But still, the fact that Mike Jackson and CM Punk, obviously it makes sense financially for the UFC to have CM Punk so high up on the card because he had name value. They were paying him about $500,000. He had all that name value from the WWE, but still, the fact that Mike Jackson was on the main card over Charles Oliveira and Alistair Overeem, Dan Ige, Anthony Smith as Rashad Evans, like, I don't know, it seems like it's a weird thing to think about, but it does make sense for the UFC. Like, there would be no point to put CM Punk on the prelims, the early prelims. There's at least benefit to putting him on the main card, but it's still just weird to look back at because the fight ended up being the lowest skilled fight in the UFC probably ever. I don't think it will be hard to ever have a lower skilled fight than that one. CM Punk would try and guillotine Mike Jackson by holding on to him like a koala, and Mike Jackson would just play around with him, sit in his guard, punch at him, and it was just awful fight. No skill whatsoever. Mike Jackson clearly won, but Dana White was not happy. He promised that neither man would fight in the UFC again. But as we know, Uncle Dana can't be trusted because 4 whole years later, Mike Jackson was announced to be fighting Dean Barry. Now, Dean Barry is an Irish kickboxer who a lot of his career had been at lightweight and featherweight. But here he was, moving up to welterweight to fight Mike Jackson. Another really weird fight. So in this fight, Mike Jackson was being very cocky, talking to Barry, moving his head around, just trying to play around. And then he gets kicked in the dick. Then he gets dropped. He's on the way to being finished, but he got real lucky here, depending on how you look at it. But as Barry's going in for a finish, he pushes off Mike Jackson, and as he's pushing off, his fingers go into Mike Jackson's eyes, and Mike Jackson, he's been eye gouged. He was on the way to losing that fight. So making the most of the opportunity, which is the Mike Jackson way. This man started off running newspapers around and then ended up fighting in the UFC because of a friendship with his old boss who used to deliver newspapers for. So in this situation, he wasn't going to come back out there. He was about to be knocked out. He'd been dropped. And so he decided to take the DQ as a massive underdog in the first round. So Mike Jackson gets that victory there. And, he's actually got a win. The CM Punk fight was actually overturned to a no contest because he tested positive for marijuana, which, that I don't think they do that anymore, but because of at the time they did, the fight was overturned. But, Mike Jackson was coming off a win, and I guess he must have really felt like he did win that because he came back a few months later, which, this man hasn't really been the most active guy, but he actually decided to come back. And he was going to fight, he did fight, Pete Dead Game Rodriguez, who was a 4-1 welterweight, with all his wins being in the first round by brutal KO, and his one loss was against future ranked welterweight contender Jack Della Maddalena, who, so we'll put this into perspective. Jack Della's like His main skill set is boxing, as most people would know, and Mike Jackson's main skill set was boxing, but at a much, much, much lower level. So anyone who logically looked at this fight, they sort of knew how this was going to go. Pete Rodriguez, like, he clearly lost to Jack Della. He got finished, but he did land some shots on Della. He was competent in the feet. Landed some good body shots, landed some good head strikes. Anyone who's seen that, just purely with the eye test, it was pretty obvious how this fight was going to go. So the fight starts. Jackson's doing his little taunty things that he does. Then he gets dropped with a body shot, gets ground and pounded a little bit. He gets back up. Pete Rodriguez gets him against the fence, and he lands a devastating knee to his head. And that's all she wrote for Mike Jackson here. He's knocked out. Pete Rodriguez lands another about 3 strikes as Mike Jackson's legs are pretty much stiffened up. And that's all she wrote. Mike Jackson just gets brutally knocked out. And that's the end of his UFC career. But not the end of his fighting career. Because this man's weird journey didn't end there. As in December of 2022, 2 months after the KO loss to Pete Rodriguez, he gets into a physical altercation with Jake Shields, the former Shooto welterweight champion, former Strikeforce middleweight champion, a guy who fought George St. Pierre for the welterweight title, who beat Dan Henderson. They get into a physical altercation over some stupid shit. I think Jackson tried to call Jake Shields racist, and I think Jake Shields said back that Mike Jackson's racist because of the whole obsession Mike Jackson has with calling people snow roaches and how he calls himself a snow roach exterminator. So because of this, they get into a physical altercation, and from what we could see, Jake Shields just is on top of him, sitting on him, and Mike Jackson actually eye gouges him as he's on top, and I think makes Jake Shields' eye bleed. But after that, Mike Jackson threatens to press charges against Jake Shields, but I don't know what's happened with this situation. Really haven't heard anything lately. But it didn't end there. Now, Mike Jackson is, he's still a personality in the sport, but he's still running his mouth against people, but not against current fighters though. No, he's not talking shit to current fighters by any means. No, he's actually trying to fight Pat Milicic in a kickboxing match, who is 57 years old. That's what Mike Jackson's trying to do now. I don't know what's happening here. They were talking about this fight. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But I don't know. It just seems like Mike Jackson just has a really weird, I don't know. This guy is just a really odd dude, and he seems to fight the oddest fight. Yeah, apparently Mike Jackson and Pat Milicic agreed to fight in a kickboxing match will be on pay-per-view. This was in February of this year, so I don't know if this is actually going to go ahead or not, but I don't know. This seems like a really weird situation in general. I don't know. Mike Jackson's career is really bizarre. He'll end up, I don't know. He was trying to get a boxing match with Jake Shields, which, as we know, Jake Shields lost. I'm pretty sure Jake Shields lost a striking round on Bully Beatdown, so that would just be awful. Mike Jackson's got 4 wins in professional boxing, but against absolute cans. So that would just be awful if we ever seen a Jake Shields versus Mike Jackson boxing match. It would just be, it'd be terrible. I don't know, Mike Jackson's journey is very. It seems like he had a very privileged life, honestly. Grew up in the Woodlands. He participated in badminton, like I said before, and he got everything handed to him because he used to deliver newspaper. Yet, what is he so angry about? Like he has a weird hatred for white people, and I don't know why, because Mick Maynard's white, and he handed him a career pretty much on a silver platter just because he used to deliver newspapers for him. Gave him a photography job, gave him an MMA career. Maybe that's why he hates people, like white people, because he ended up fighting in the UFC and realizing he's not that good. Like, maybe that's why he's got such a deep hatred for snow roaches, as he says. Because, yeah, it seems like he's got really nothing to be mad about. Yeah, I don't know. The guy's like just seems like a really odd guy. Grew up with a cop as a father. Seems like he grew up in a decent area with a police officer father. Like, I don't know. It seems like the guy's just had a really privileged life. Yet he's still just really mad at everything. Like, doesn't make sense to me personally. If I had all the opportunities that Mike Jackson had in my life, I would love it, every single person, but Mike Jackson's gonna Mike Jackson. I just, I don't know, it just seems like a really weird hill for him to die on here, but that's his career. His career has just been him being handed these fights. Like, think of it this way, like, the guy that Jack Della Maddalena fought last weekend, Basil Havez, that guy should have been in the UFC ages ago. He went to a draw with Jeremiah Wells, which he should have won. And yet Mike Jackson gets his debut in the UFC. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, think about it this way. There's all these good fighters who never got opportunities to be in the UFC. Like, Mike Jackson has had a UFC career, and Fedor Emelianenko has not. I know there's like a lot of problems that Dana White and Fedor had personally, but it's still like Mike Jackson has had a UFC career, and it's not like, at least with CM Punk, there's like a reason for him to have a career because he had like a big name. People knew him from his time in the WWE, TNA, all that sort of stuff, ROH. But like, yeah, he brought the pro wrestling crowd in. But Mike Jackson, like, you didn't really bring anything in, really. Like I guess he brought in a freak show. Bringing in a normal average guy and seeing how he does against like, UFC competition. Like, I don't know, it just seems, it is very bizarre. Like, I get he had the whole friendship with Mick Maynard that got him into the UFC in the first place. But, like, so many talented fighters that have never got any opportunities in the UFC. And yet, Mike Jackson's had like a 4-fight career in the UFC. His whole MMA career, his whole professional MMA career has all been in the UFC. When I think there's not even many guys on the regional scene I'd pick him against. He's got a really bad chin. He's unathletic. He doesn't really have the best skill set whatsoever. He's got like some, he's got boxing, but doesn't really have a ground game. Like I said before, his chin's not the best. He's been dropped in every fight except for the fight against CM Punk. But even then, CM Punk, I believe, rocked him like slightly. Not like rocked him all over the place, but he did land a punch, and it made Jackson, move around a bit funny. And he also got taken down by CM Punk as well. So, that's just it's another bad look for him. But I don't know, the guy, I don't know why he's so angry, like, he reminds me of the scene from 8 Mile where Eminem's rapping and he says about his name's Clarence, and his parents had a real nice marriage, and he went to a private school, sort of stuff. Like, that's Mike Jackson. Mike Jackson is fucking Clarence. Is it Clarence? Is that his name? Fuck. I think his name's Clarence. I hope it's Clarence. Yeah, his name is Clarence. Okay, cool. I'm glad I remembered that properly. He reminds me of Clarence. Like, he's had like a nice upbringing in a nice like area of Texas. Played badminton, and yet he's so hateful. It just I don't understand it. Like, you'd think he'd be happy with his life, with how it is, but no, not at all. Man's not happy at all. It's just, yeah, it makes you think. Like, some people are just born to be miserable, I guess. Because, like, he got a chance to fight CM Punk. Like just that's like a huge opportunity for him. Like, he could have made the most of that. He could have got him out of there instead of like playing around like an idiot. And he could have got some like decent, like, I don't know, he could have done some pro wrestling or something if he did it like correctly. I know he had a few like some pro wrestling moments, or he did some, like, he went to some shows or something, but he could have turned that into a massive opportunity, but instead he fought stupid. And it shows how low level CM Punk was, that he got big brothered around by Mike Jackson like that. But yeah, what a weird journey to have. I felt like talking about how, like, this guy's had everything handed to him, and yet he's got such a deep hatred for everything. Like, this guy doesn't seem very happy, and it just, yeah, like, it's bizarre that after every opportunity this guy's been handed in on a silver platter, that he's still not happy with anything. I hope he has another fight, because I don't know. There's something funny about watching him fight, because like he seems to talk a lot of smack about any person he fights, and then he ended up losing. Like, I remember watching a video of him saying about like Pete Rodriguez, he's gonna smack him down to lightweight or something like that, and then he immediately got fucking butchered against Pete. But yeah, I guess it would have been funny if the UFC gave him another fight, but like, there was no winnable fights for him, so it would have just been like an easy win for someone, which I wouldn't have mind seeing it, if I'm being honest. It's he. I don't know. The man just seems to have a hatred for white people. Like, there's no other way to sugarcoat it. Like, I don't know why he hates white people so much, but fair play to the guy. Like, if you go through his Twitter and you just look up Snow Roach or White Fragility, like, every single post, there'll be literally like, there'll be like hundreds of different tweets where he's just calling random people Snow Roach and talking about White Fragility. Like, even look, 3 hours ago, you were back to projecting in my mentions Snow Roach. Snow Roach, Snow Roach, Snow Roach. All in your white fragility today, Snow Roach. Peak white fragility. Like, why? What even is a Snow Roach, and what is white fragility? I've never heard these terms before I seen Mike Jackson. Like, surely there'd be a better way to go than just randomly calling people Snow Roaches and talking about white fragility. Because it's his catchphrase, like, say the word, say it, Snow Roach. Like, it's just fucking bizarre. Like, it's a weird hill for him to die on. Like, anytime something weird happens, Like anytime anyone insults him or anything, the first thing he'll say is like white fragility. Like I wonder what happened in his life to like for that to be his go-to insult. Because I've seen him say it to people as well, and then they'll like reply back and like, no, actually, I'm Mexican, and then he'll call them a weirdo like for saying that they're not white. So the he's got some weird obsession with these words. Like I feel like he wakes up and first thing in the morning, he looks himself in the mirror and he just says, "Who's a Snow Ridge exterminator? You are." Like I can picture him doing something like that. Like the guy, yeah, the guy. I feel like the guy needs some help. I'll end it on that. I feel like this guy needs he needs to get some issues sorted out. I reckon because yeah, I think he's quite miserable. I would imagine with how he's living his life. But he's in the UFC, so well he was in the UFC, so nobody can ever take that away from him. His career was awful. We'll also say that his one win was a DQ where he got the shit beaten out of him and got dropped, and he also got big brothered by Mickey Gall, which probably really hurt him there. And then he gets KO'd brutally by P. Rodriguez. So yeah, people say you can never take away him having a UFC career, but I feel like most people would fare the same that he did anyway, because he's just an average bloke. To quote Luke Rockhold, he's just an average bloke. He wasn't some supreme athlete. He wasn't some skilled tactician. He was just a guy who did a few cardio boxing classes or something like that. But hey, he was in the UFC. What can you do? But it's always funny to look back at his career. I always look back at his fights because it's just, I don't know, it's just weird that this guy was in the UFC for that long as well. He was in the UFC for about 6 years. They also re-signed him as well because he got cut after he lost to Mickey Gall, and then they re-signed him for the Punk fight. And then he actually had like a fucking UFC career. Like he had 2 fights after that. I don't know. It's weird that we're in a world where Mike Jackson is like instantly in the UFC, but George Hardwick has to go through the Dana White Contender Series. Like George Hardwick is such a better fighter than Mike Jackson, but I like that he did. Like I don't know, I like freak show fights, so I guess it was a spectacle to watch him fight. But it's just weird that so many people have to go on the fucking regional scene for years and grind, get all these wins, make sure they don't lose, and then 0-0 Mike Jackson instantly signed to the UFC. Like, I don't know, it's a weird business. He didn't really bring anything into the UFC. Like, he didn't bring in pay-per-view buys or anything like that. Like, he didn't even really build his fights fun. Like, he should have been a trash talker. Like, he talks all the trash against his opponents after he loses. Like, him and Dean Barry still have beef to this day. So I don't understand why he didn't just, like, talk shit coming into the fight. At least, like, make the build-up fun. Like, that would have been a smarter thing to do, personally, in my opinion. Like, if you're not gonna... You don't have the most entertaining fight style. Like, he's not a knockout artist. He's a knocked-out artist. So it would have been better for him if he just built up his fights. Like, obviously, like the guy was never going to be UFC champion or ranked even, or even like top 50, but you could have at least tried to build up your fights, bring in some interest or something. But it's like he didn't even bring in any interest. So it's like, I don't know, it's just bizarre. And he would have been on 10-10 as well. I mean, so he would have been getting like the same money as like every other fighter, while just being a newspaper guy who takes photos at UFC events and regional events, while being quite prejudiced for whatever reason. Like, it's not, maybe a white guy beat him in badminton and he was just furious at that. It's like he probably just fucking got home and just smashed a mirror at home, screaming, angry, pissed off. How dare you beat me in badminton, he said. Because I can't see any other reason why in Mike Jackson's privileged life that he has so much hate in his heart. I hope he gets that all sorted, but like I don't get it. He has such a deep hatred for white people, and I guess I'll end it on that. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's been an interesting run for him though. He had a Golden Gloves background as well, I believe. So he had a boxing background, but you wouldn't have fought it. Like he beat up CM Punk on the feet, but he didn't beat him up like you would imagine a former Golden Glove boxer to. But hey, what do I know? Maybe Mike Jackson was just holding back in all his fights. Maybe he just didn't want to hurt all his opponents. Maybe he could have knocked every single guy out and dethroned Leon Edwards. But I guess we'll never know. The UFC, they did him dirty. They cut him too early. But yeah, this is just a video I had to make. The case of Mike Jackson. It's just a really interesting one. I don't think there'll ever be a UFC career like Mike Jackson's ever again. I'd be shocked. Maybe they got to sign Oscar Willis. Now that I would actually enjoy that, because I know he had an amateur fight, so we need to get Oscar Willis in the UFC. Now that would be the greatest timeline. I need to see Oscar Willis like fucking throwing hands with some UFC fighters. But yeah, thanks for listening to this video. I know I fucking go on and on and on. I try and I get points in my head and then I go, oh fuck. Now I'm going around in circles. But if anyone who listens to this, and if anyone actually listens to this whole thing, I really appreciate it there. But yeah, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe, even put notifications on if you want, because I'm going to be making a lot of videos, and if people want to watch it, put the notifications on. Come on, let's get me in that algorithm, because I'm not going to stop making these videos. I'm going to make lots of videos, and yeah, I don't know, it just brings me passion making these videos. Eventually the quality and everything's going to get better once I get used to all this stuff. Like, I'm very new to this, so that's why I go around talking around in circles. But yeah, I appreciate anyone who watches these videos. So thanks. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.